The Korean War's roots stretch back to the end of World War II, a global conflict that reshaped the world order. With Japan's defeat, Korea was liberated from decades of harsh Japanese rule, a period marked by oppression and cultural suppression. The Korean people, after years of subjugation, celebrated their newfound freedom. Hopes for a unified, independent Korea were high. But these aspirations were soon to be challenged as the United States and Soviet Union, former allies now emerging as rivals, divided the peninsula at the 38th parallel. This division was intended as a temporary measure to oversee the surrender of Japanese forces. The Soviets, seeking to expand their sphere of influence, installed Kim Il-sung's communist regime in the north, while the Americans, determined to contain communism, backed Syngman Rhee's staunchly anti-communist government in the south. What was initially meant to be a temporary division, a line of administrative convenience, quickly hardened into a permanent border, splitting families, communities, and a culture thousands of years old, creating deep wounds that would take generations to heal. Both leaders, fueled by fervent nationalism and ideological conviction, dreamed of reunification, but only on their own terms, fueling a dangerous arms buildup on both sides of the divide. Tensions along the 38th parallel escalated steadily, with frequent skirmishes, propaganda battles, and growing hostility. The Korean people, caught in the crossfire of these escalating tensions, found themselves trapped in a global power struggle as the Cold War's shadow loomed ever larger, casting a pall over the peninsula. The peninsula was now a dangerous flashpoint, a tinderbox waiting for a spark, with two rival states, each armed and supported by a superpower patron. The dream of peaceful unity faded with each passing day, replaced by mutual suspicion, escalating animosity, and the ever-present threat of open war. This tragic division, born from the ashes of World War II and the burgeoning Cold War, set the stage for a devastating conflict that would reshape Korea forever. The seeds of war had been sown in the fertile ground of ideological conflict and national division, and the world would soon witness their tragic harvest, a brutal and bloody conflict that would claim millions of lives. The Korean War was about to begin, a war that would test the resolve of nations and redefine the boundaries of the Cold War. The fate of a nation, torn apart by ideological division, and the stability of the world order itself, hung precariously in the balance. The first shots, the opening salvos of a long and bloody war, were only a matter of time. On June 25, 1950, a date that would forever be etched in the annals of history, North Korean forces under the command of Kim Il-sung, driven by a fervent desire for unification, launched a surprise invasion across the 38th parallel, the line that divided the peninsula. Spearheading the assault were Soviet tanks, and a relentless barrage of artillery fire led the charge, overwhelming the tragically unprepared and ill-equipped South Korean army. City after city fell in rapid succession. Within a matter of days, the capital, Seoul, was captured, and the South Korean government was forced to flee south in a desperate attempt to maintain some semblance of control. The North's ultimate goal was to swiftly unify Korea under the banner of communism before the international community could effectively react and intervene. President Truman, witnessing this brazen act of aggression, saw the invasion as a critical test of American resolve and its commitment to containing the spread of communism around the globe. The domino theory loomed large in the minds of policymakers. If Korea fell to communism, it was feared that other nations in the region might soon follow suit. The US swiftly rushed to intervene militarily, but by the end of that long, hot summer, South Korean and American troops, fighting side by side, were desperately cornered within the confines of the Pusan perimeter, a tiny, precarious foothold in the southeastern corner of the Korean peninsula. Severely outnumbered, undersupplied, and utterly exhausted, the weary defenders faced the very real prospect of annihilation. The fate of South Korea, and arguably the credibility of the entire Western alliance, rested entirely on this desperate last-ditch stand. The world watched with bated breath as the Korean peninsula teetered precariously on the very edge of a complete communist takeover. The next strategic move, the next decision made, would irrevocably determine the future of Korea and its people. The stakes in this brutal conflict had simply never been higher for anyone involved. The Korean War had truly and irrevocably begun in earnest. The ultimate outcome of this bloody struggle was, at this point, still far from certain. The entire world braced itself, anxiously awaiting what would inevitably come next on the Korean peninsula. The North Korean invasion shocked the world and triggered an emergency response at the United Nations. With the Soviet Union absent from the Security Council, the UN condemned the attack and called for military support to defend South Korea. 16 nations sent combat troops, with the United States leading the multinational United Nations Command under General Douglas MacArthur. Supplies, air support and reinforcements poured in, bolstering the defenders at the Pusan perimeter. The tide began to turn as UN forces halted the North Korean advance. The line held, preventing the fall of South Korea. For the first time, the UN had assembled a global military force to stop aggression. The world had drawn a line in Korea. Now, MacArthur prepared a bold counterattack that would change the course of the war. The fate of the peninsula hung in the balance. The next move would be decisive. The world waited. General MacArthur, a figure of immense military stature, conceived a plan that was nothing short of audacious. It was a high-risk, high-reward strategy that could potentially alter the course of the Korean War. His daring plan was to land UN forces at Incheon, a strategic location far behind enemy lines. This would create a second front, disrupting North Korean supply lines and forcing them to divert resources. Incheon's treacherous tides, some of the most extreme in the world, and formidable seawalls made the operation exceptionally risky. Many considered it an impossible feat. But MacArthur, a seasoned commander known for his bold decisions, firmly believed that surprise was his greatest weapon. He was confident that the element of surprise would outweigh the inherent dangers of the landing. On September 15, 1950, the ambitious operation commenced. U.S. Marines, the spearhead of the assault, stormed the beaches under heavy naval bombardment, paving the way for the landing forces. The sudden attack caught the North Korean defenders completely off guard, disrupting their plans and sowing confusion among their ranks. The landing was a stunning success. Against all odds, the UN forces had secured a foothold in Incheon. UN forces quickly seized Incheon, overcoming the initial resistance and establishing a secure perimeter. The successful landing effectively cut off North Korean supply lines, crippling their ability to sustain their offensive in the south. The North Korean army, facing dwindling supplies and a renewed offensive, began to collapse under the pressure. The North Korean forces were retreating in chaos, their lines broken and their morale shattered. Simultaneously, UN troops broke out from the Pusan perimeter, launching a counteroffensive that further destabilized the North Korean army. With the momentum on their side, UN forces advanced north, pushing back the retreating North Korean army. Within weeks, Seoul was recaptured, liberating the South Korean capital from North Korean occupation. The recapture of Seoul came after fierce fighting, with intense urban combat between UN forces and the remaining North Korean defenders. The momentum had decisively shifted in favor of the UN forces. What seemed like imminent defeat had become a dramatic turnaround, a testament to the success of the Incheon Landing. The original UN mission, to repel the North Korean invasion and restore the status quo, was accomplished. The border was restored. But with victory seemingly in sight, a new and complex question emerged, one that would reshape the future of the conflict. The question was, should UN forces stop at the 38th parallel, the original border between North and South Korea? Or should they push into North Korea, with the aim of unifying the country under a single democratic government? The decision, fraught with political and military considerations, would have far-reaching consequences for the Korean peninsula and the wider world. The war's next phase was about to begin, a phase marked by new ambitions and escalating risks. The stakes were higher than ever before. The world watched with bated breath as the conflict escalated, aware that the decisions made in Korea could have global repercussions. The future of Korea was at a crossroads, hanging in the balance. The next move would change the course of history, determining the fate of a nation and potentially altering the global balance of power. Buoyed by success, UN forces crossed into North Korea, aiming to end the war by unifying the peninsula. As they neared the Chinese border, Mao Zedong warned against foreign troops so close to China. MacArthur dismissed the threat, pushing his troops toward the Yalu River. In late 1950, hundreds of thousands of Chinese soldiers launched a massive surprise attack, overwhelming the UN forces. the advance turned into a desperate, freezing retreat through brutal winter conditions. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir became legendary for the Marines' epic breakout. The Chinese intervention shattered hopes for a quick victory. The war's momentum reversed overnight. UN troops were pushed back below the 38th parallel. The conflict had become a deadly stalemate. The cost in lives and morale soared. The war's outcome was once again uncertain. The world realized Korea would not be easily resolved. The Chinese intervention transformed the war into a grinding stalemate. UN forces under General Ridgway regrouped and pushed back to the 38th parallel, recapturing Seoul. The front stabilized, and the war devolved into brutal trench warfare reminiscent of World War I. Battles raged over hills and ridges with little strategic value. Names like Porkchop Hill and Heartbreak Ridge became infamous. Both sides suffered heavy casualties for minimal gains. The war became a test of endurance, with neither side able to claim victory. The conflict dragged on, with soldiers enduring constant danger and hardship. The hope for a decisive end faded. The Korean peninsula was locked in a deadly deadlock. The world grew weary of the endless bloodshed. The search for peace became urgent. The cost of stalemate was measured in lives lost. With victory out of reach, both sides began peace talks in 1951 at Panmunjom. Negotiations dragged on for 2 years, stalled by disputes over the border and the fate of prisoners of war. The United Nations insisted on voluntary repatriation for POWs, while the communists demanded all prisoners return home. The deadlock fueled more fighting, as each side tried to gain leverage. The war's end was delayed by politics and pride, not strategy. Soldiers continued to die while diplomats argued. Only a shift in global leadership would break the impasse. The world waited for a breakthrough. The cost of delay was immense. Peace remained elusive. In 1953, new leadership in the US and Soviet Union and the threat of nuclear escalation finally pushed negotiations forward. A compromise on POWs was reached, and on July 27, 1953, the Korean Armistice Agreement was signed at Panmunjom. The guns fell silent, and a new border, the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ, was established. The DMZ became one of the world's most fortified borders. The armistice ended the fighting, but not the war. No peace treaty was signed. North and South Korea remained technically at war. The cost was staggering: millions dead or wounded, cities destroyed, families divided. The peninsula remained split, the dream of reunification unfulfilled. The war's legacy was a divided Korea and a fragile peace. The world had changed, but the conflict's wounds endured. The Korean War's end was only a pause, not a resolution. The threat of renewed conflict still lingers. The scars of war remain. The Korean War, often called the Forgotten War, left a profound legacy. It cemented the division of Korea and created the DMZ, separating millions of families. The war marked the first major clash of the Cold War, setting the stage for future conflicts. South Korea rebuilt with international aid, becoming a thriving democracy and economic powerhouse. North Korea became isolated, focusing on military power while its people suffered. The armistice stopped the fighting, but the conflict remains unresolved. The Korean peninsula is still a global flashpoint. The war's lessons echo in today's world, about the cost of division and the dangers of ideological conflict. The tragedy that began in 1950 is not yet finished. The final chapter of the Korean War has yet to be written.